Hey guys, it's Josh,
Jeff,
and Terry.
and we're here to talk about effective communication.
Say hi, guys.
Hi guys.
Hi.
hi.
I forgot about that part.
Which way I think you and Josh both paused.
Yes. My brain immediately heard the little dum, dum, dum.
I think it's important for us to remember when we're communicating that there's a lot of different ways that we can communicate. And we have had to restart the video a few times because some of the ways that we can communicate are
Inappropriate to talk about?
or just funny. Yes.
Yes.
We have a good time.
So Jeff, I am going to let you go first.
Of course, yeah.
Before you pop.
Of course, yeah.
What are the different types of communication that can be employed?
Well, there are several, Josh. I would say the first.
What's your favorite one?
Oh boy. How about verbal? Let's go with verbal. Let's go with verbal communication. Not necessarily my favorite, but it is one because that's the main way in which we're even communicating here is verbal communication, just how we speak, what we say. Now, as I'm sure as we get into other types here, it's not the only way we communicate, and obviously how we, even as I'm sitting here, I'm now talking with my hand at the same time, so there's another form we'll talk about here in a minute, but verbal is still important, right? It doesn't really, that's how we can really do effective communication too, right? Is I can say something in a very clear manner, so you or Terry or maybe Josh might be, kidding. Josh would always figure it out. It'd be me that would mess it up. But having that very clear verbal communication, so people understand, what are going on and out there as we're communicating and having a conversation.
Yep. Oh, we go next?
Yeah, please.
All right,
go ahead.
so since you talk about verbal, I'll talk about
Non-verbal.
non-verbal communication. So, and then that can
Can
be.
you please do that non-verbally for me?
I sure can. It's more boring.
It is way more boring.
Nonverbal can be many, many different things. Like you're using your hands to talk, right?
Yeah.
I have my arms crossed right now, right? So you're always conveying some sort of communication type by your body language or your nonverbal communication, right? We've all been in discussions or work environments, or maybe you're having a conversation with your wife where you're having a polite discussion on some topic that you disagree on. There can be some nonverbal communication that goes on, right? I know Heidi doesn't even realize this, but when she is stressed about something or concerned about something, she wrinkles her right here. She has this little wrinkle in her, and she doesn't even know it, right? And Hope does it too. Actually, it's kind of funny. She passed it on, but I can immediately tell that I'm doing something that's stressing her out, or I'm saying something, right? So if you are aware of the nonverbal, you can get a lot of communication from that just by watching people's body language. So.
As a matter of fact, we did it today. The first time Josh got out of his car as we're entering into the building, Terry and I both looked at him and go, "Are you okay?"
Are you a zombie?
He hadn't said a word to us yet, right?
Yeah.
But just the way he was walking and just the look at his face was like, "Wait a minute."
Yeah.
It turned out everything was fine. He was just
I
trying.
stood up too fast getting out of the car, so I was seeing stars and I'm about to pass out. So
Again, nonverbal communication. We notice something without a word being said, and it's amazing how effective it actually is.
Mm-hmm.
So I think then the next one, my personal favorite. No, written communication. There will be plenty of people that will tell you that this is not my strength, but we can communicate a lot via writing. Actually, we were just having a conversation right before we started this video about work emails and how to formulate appropriate work emails, when to bullet point, when to do a summary at the top, right? Various things, because how we do those types of things in written communication can either be effective or not effective, and there's certain things that we can do in those that just make it way more effective for your audience that is listening. So written communication would be another, I think, really good one.
Yeah, in written communication, it definitely there's tons of different ways to have written communication.
Absolutely.
Right? There's different media that you can use, whether it's email or text messages or a written letter, a little card, whatever. Right? There's sometimes we'll just write little notes somewhere and leave them, for maybe your spouse or your kid or something like that. So just different things like that. It's kind of cool. So, but another one is visual communication, right? So, and I have no idea what you mean by that. So,
Well, I was actually, my question I have on this one is, what do you consider like an emoji? Is that a written or a visual?
It's a little of both. In fact, it has some nonverbal in there too. That's
right.
It's part of the interesting part of visual, and this is something that I think we are influenced by all the time. We don't necessarily notice it. Visual encompasses things like the color of something. If you put words into the color red versus the color blue, it's going to convey a different emotion behind it. If you include diagrams to go with something, you can further communicate. Pictures are worth 1,000 words.
So what does it communicate when I have put like orange lettering on top of a red color?
That you hate
But that I hate everybody.
Colorblind.
Yeah. So I can't actually read it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would communicate that you like Microsoft's hot dog stand color scheme.
Yes. So like we covered, there's a lot of different types, and there's multiple subtypes, and there's a blending of types that we just naturally do all the time. And each one of those should be, when you're communicating, something that you work on and that you can become more fluent in, ones that you have strengths in or ones that you have weaknesses in, because people relate to different types of communication in different ways. And we'll get into a little more of when we might want to consider the different types. But within each of those types, there's also different styles, which are kind of a flavor of how you would apply or implement one of those types. So you want to cover one of the styles, Jeff?
Sure. I'm gonna go with informal
Excellent.
because I really want Terry to cover formal.
We're gonna get him tails and a top hat.
I want to hear him do it in a British accent too. That just to me screams formal for whatever reason. But informal communication, right? A lot of just the fun we're having here is a little bit more informal. Although some of the way we're even doing this, though, tends to be even a little formal, as I steal probably some of Terry's thunder here a little bit, but just a little more informal, just kind of hanging out, having a conversation. That's all just kind of an informal way of doing it. It's just every day. A lot of times, like I said, like an everyday part of a conversation that we'd have with just anyone walking down the street or at a line in a store, although with social distancing, have too many conversations in line anymore, but at a gas pump, right? Different things like that, which is more of an informal kind of style.
Is it fair that the medium you choose can also be a whether it's formal or informal, choosing a text message versus an email, or a sticky note versus a actual letter?
That would depend upon the generation in which
That's
you
also
are,
yes.
in which you are part of, as to whether you consider a text message formal or not, or a post-it note
Absolutely.
formal. So there actually probably is a really interesting play on how even generations or groups of people you view formal and informal and those sort of things. So that's actually a really good point, Josh, is knowing your audience a little bit may determine what's informal, formal, what's appropriate and not appropriate, and whatever you're trying to communicate. But that's informal.
Yep.
So
what's formal?
Formal would be anybody from Britain. Formal.
or anybody that can do a really good British accent.
British accent. I've been just with Wayne for several weeks now. No, about a week. And so I'm working on my British accent.
You should continue working on your British accent.
I need Wayne here. So
Wayne would be
Wayne
excellent.
would help. So I think that formal communication is obviously there's specific use cases for it, right? So whether depending on who you're communicating with, and you want to be in a more formal, and even work emails, sometimes you're addressing someone where you want to say address a high upper level, someone in a company where you're going to call them a Mr. something or Mrs. something kind of a thing. So you address it differently. Whereas when you're emailing your coworker, you're just like, hey, bonehead, right? Take care of this for me or something like that.
I
So
have
sometimes
never once typed that into an email to a coworker.
Really?
No.
You should try it.
I think I'll
Super effective.
So, Josh, you consider that effective communication?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I think that, if we look at history, formal communication was a lot more prevalent, right? As communication became, to communicate through a medium other than speaking, and even speaking was formal, but communication became more and more readily available through different mediums. The formality kind of leaves, right? And to Jeff's point too, that the generational thing, people have, and I think technology has made it really easy for people to be very informal. Right?
Absolutely.
I mean, we've all gotten text messages where people just do speech to text. I mean, that is one of the most informal ways of communicating, because it usually gets all messed up and some kind of weird words and that kind of stuff. So the formal kind of, it's almost like it's kind of being, whatever, weeded out. It's kind of fading in history, but there is still a place for it, right? If you think about legal letters and different things like
Yes.
that and whatnot. So.
And I think both of you did a pretty good job of uncovering that it has changed. Those definitions have changed over time. From a traditional, what we would consider, if I was going to have something formal, I would expect it to be on a typed letterhead, maybe with very crisp typography, with a specific type of font and in a specific color. You use black or blue, not hot pink or orange on yellow. But modern times, maybe that would convey something different than it would have in the past.
I know what it would convey to me. What am I in trouble for?
Exactly. You talk about the legal.
Right.
You expect to become an illegal, and that's exactly it. So I think that leads, we've talked about the different types. We've talked about the different styles that each of those types can adopt, and the mediums through which those can be conveyed, which I think really leads into what are things you need to consider both before you start communicating and during a communication session in whatever format, type, style that you've chosen, because that can also be fluid as well. So Jeff, what's something that you can consider?
Well, I think the first one are kind of one of the things that we consider, and probably that's near the top of the list, is your audience. Who are you actually communicating to? What is appropriate in a setting? Am I sitting in front of a formal group of people who are going to give a speech in a presentation? Am I talking to my coworker that's sitting right next to me at my desk? Am I in the grocery store line? Am I trying to write a very specific, type of letter to engage your response in some manner, whether it's legal or financial or something like that? Right? There's a lot of, you have to know who your audience is. That you're addressing that to, I think, is one of the things that really, if we would consider that, it allows us to gauge as to what really type of communication am I going for, what's the style that I kind of want to put that in, to go back to the previous two kind of things that we talked about.
Absolutely.
So I would start with considering my audience.
Yeah, I think when you're considering your audience, we take that for granted a lot of times. You're in the grocery
Absolutely.
store, you're chit-chatting with the person checking you out or something like that, but we do take it for granted. But if you do think about it, you can be a lot more effective in your communication. So
Yeah.
I think also included in that would be the intent, right? So once you know your audience, what are you intending to communicate with them? And so, because once you know what you're intending to communicate, now you can start to formulate how are you going to make sure you communicate that intent, right? In addition to your intent, knowing your audience also should allow you to think through, like, what do I want what am I intending them to get out of it, right? So it's not just about me getting my point across, it's about how do I want them to receive it, how do I want to make sure they're getting the right communication out of it. So I think intent, thinking through that is super important, because we can get way off track in communication, right?
Oh, absolutely.
As if you go back and watch this, we're probably
Yeah, we violated quite a few of these already, but that's part of the reason that we want to go over these things, because it's very easy for it to become an automatic response. And if we bring our attention to it every now and then, it allows us to be more purposeful. Now, you guys brought up intentionality, or your intent, and the audience that you're going to communicate to, and I think you're absolutely right. Those two things combined will really help you pick and choose what type of communication and the style of communication. And then that leads into all of the little decisions that you get to make once you've made those choices. For instance, I think your tone and the volume that you choose is going to make a huge difference on what's communicated. I know my dad has always taught me, and I've found it very true in various communication is very difficult at times. situations, that's the word I was looking for. In various communication situations, that it's much less what I'm saying and much more how I'm saying it.
No.
Exactly. and the how is, your tone, your volume, even the vocabulary, how you're sitting, what your face looks like. It can come down to literally what I'm wearing. Am I conveying a very formal message, but I'm wearing a t-shirt and jeans? Well, that conveys maybe a more relaxed than what I'm trying, so I've got a disconnect in how it's coming across. Those are all various things. What's something else that you guys can think of that you should consider when trying to communicate effectively?
This happens quite a bit actually. Jeff's over at our place, and one of the kids will come in, and like James will come in, and James will say, "Hey, Lily got hurt on the rocks and she's bleeding." And the way he says it, you're talking about tone and volume, all that kind of stuff. Jeff will look at him and say, "Tell her to come in and we'll take care of it." Right? Knowing that, the way he said it, right? And there was one time he comes in,
a couple times,
and he's visually shaking,
panicking,
and I can't remember what he said, but he said something about that they were in a neighbor's yard and she got mad and we're in trouble. And Jeff and I immediately, we didn't ask any questions, we just jumped up and ran outside, right? So his tone, his nonverbal communication, everything said something. Whereas before it's like, "Hey, Lily's bleeding," we're just like, "Yeah, we'll tell her to come in," right? 'Cause you can just tell, right? So there's a lot of different things that go into it.
And in that specific circumstance, we were up and out the door, or moving out the door towards him, even before he said a word. Because just the expression on his face is, something is very wrong. I think there's been twice that's happened to us.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, that's a point.
That's a good point, that one.
So continuing down this line, Josh, if I may just continue
Please.
to add in here, vocabulary. What vocabulary would you use? Am I using some, more slang type things, or am I swearing? And I don't personally condone swearing. I think it's a very awful way to do communication, because generally it's done in a very negative context. So I don't personally use it just because I don't think it adds very much value to anything. But it's definitely one of those things that if I'm in a more formal setting where I'm, talking to an executive of my company or some sort of manager of my company, I'm going to avoid using vocabulary like, swearing or, really, crazy slang. I'm going to be trying to be a little bit more formal in my vocabulary that is doing something. But if I'm just having a conversation with Josh and Terry, I still don't use foul language. But have I? Well, I don't think I've ever really used foul language with you guys. Have I ever?
Not that I can
Maybe
ever recall.
once as I hit my head into a brick wall while trying to catch a football. Maybe once. I don't know, something like that. But yeah, that was a long time ago. My head still hurts a little bit. But a lot of times it's a little bit more relaxed just in our conversation, maybe a little bit more slang or informal, shorter sentences, or we throw out a really long word just to try to confuse the other person, right? Just as, some fun. So I think what we do with the vocabulary and the setting and who we're talking with, I think really does matter.
Like communiversion?
Communiversion. What was the other one that we had?
Circumcision?
Circumcision or circumstance. Little things that, funny come out of the mouth as you're talking that we edit out as so you guys don't always see.
Yes. Well, vocabulary is one I know that I've personally struggled with, not because I have this
even
enormous, absolutely even in this talk, but it's knowing your audience and making sure that you're not using technical jargon for someone who has absolutely no idea. That can be very off-putting or even condescending. But also doing it to a younger audience. I wouldn't talk to someone who's, I shouldn't talk to someone who's 5 the same way that I would talk to Terry and Jeff. Either in my word choice or in the style of, some of my vocals. But you also have to be careful not to oversimplify, which I think is something that our modern society is really driving more towards. Which isn't necessarily bad, it's just understanding what is that conveying in and of itself as well.
Yeah.
I think for the sake of really covering one last topic that plays a huge part in this, personality. knowing someone's personality is critically important, I think, in communication. And even if you don't know their personality,
Would you get to your point, please?
yes. See, this is what happens.
Sorry.
Sorry, Aria.
What type of personality am I? But that does happen. And you actually bring up a funny point, because having worked
I love funny points.
with Jeff and Terry long enough, I have learned when I'm trying to communicate something that is important, I can't drone on as much as I have a propensity to. I need to be short, sweet, to the point, and that's not a bad thing. It's good for me to understand that I'm going to communicate more effectively with Jeff if I don't babble on. There's nothing wrong with that.
You need to make sure you circumcise your points.
I need to circumcise my points. Yes. But then also with somebody who's a little more social, or likes to have a little more fun, I can't be boring and monotone like I'm being now. I need to actually try to be funny and engaging and pause and ask questions, as opposed to just bleh all over everybody.
Or story formatted.
Or story format, which is something else we were talking about.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think that's a great point. Personality is a good one to consider. If you're dealing with someone more like me, who's more of a direct, give me the 4 bullet points and give them to me fast. Or extend anyone has that. I mean, I have a couple of bosses where I know that if I don't talk like that, they're lost, and I'm having to re-explain. And that's not a knock on them. That's just their personality tends towards that. And if I know that, I can play to that. Absolutely. And I know I have some that need some of the background. They need a little bit more of that detail. And so some of that more of that backstory and kind of story format to it, so they can understand it, really does help. I think it goes even back to somebody talking about knowing your audience a little bit. And this is kind of a really good bullet point under there, that using those personalities. And there's a couple of books on this. Robert Rome, where one's called what is the name of that book?
Personality profiles.
Personality profiles.
Something like that.
It's a DISC, D-I-S-C. Robert Rome writes it. It's a great one. Florence Littauer writes another one. The same thing. What is hers called?
Personality Plus.
Personality Plus. So there's a few of those out there for that personality type, for a couple of resources if you're looking for it.
Yeah, I think that one of the key things with communication is definitely to all these different things, and what you're really trying to do is convey a message in the most effective way possible, based on what your purpose is in conveying that message. But and it's at the same time, you're opening up that other person to be able to receive that message in the best way possible that they can receive it, right? A couple of things that come to mind as we're talking about this is, in communication, it's a two-way street, right? So effective communication also involves being aware of the other person's verbal and nonverbal and everything else we've talked about, right? And it also becomes, there's also a technique that you, or a thing that you want to take into consideration, is you don't want to assume anything when you're listening to someone else, right? Because how many times in communication have there's been an argument that started because you took something the wrong way? Why did you say that way, when the other person's like, I didn't say it that way?
All the time.
Right? So this happens constantly, right?
I would say when you get into those arguments, it's most time it's not because of what the person said. It's like you say, it's how they said it.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right. So it's super important to remember that when you're talking to people, right? Another effective technique is, when you're talking to people, is to repeat some stuff back to them, so that you understand what that person is saying. So we've been talking a ton about how do we communicate, but what part of the communication is how do we receive that communication?
That's a good point too.
Back to them too.
Yes. Okay, so Jeff, just to have some fun, how would you approach a discussion with your wife about holiday plans? Or maybe
you could just say, how would you approach a discussion with your wife, for Jeff?
That's true.
Let's go with the holiday plans.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which holiday? Tina celebrates a lot of them.
I was going to say, I think we have decorations up in our house for, at least 12 or so different ones throughout the course of the year. My wife is very artistic and very good at that, and so our house gets decorated for just about everything, which, more power to her. I have zero problem with, as long as I don't have to help. Other than carry the big totes, heavy stuff upstairs, so she doesn't have to at least do that part. But
Such a gentleman.
well, yeah, maybe. Or maybe I have a hard heart towards it, one of the two. the right way to do it is just start by asking questions, right? Hey, well, I mean, what were you thinking for the holidays, right?
What were you thinking?
And I don't mean that. That's honestly how.
Right.
It's slang, right? But that's how my wife and I talk. Hey, what are you thinking for the holidays, right? I mean, and I don't mean that in a negative way whatsoever. But that is with me and my wife.
It's
That is the
de-escalating and making sure that there's comfort in the conversation to start with.
Yeah, absolutely, right? So just, I mean, what do you think is starting with that, that type of question and just, drawing out. So it's not say, oh, by the way, hon, this is the way not to do it. By the way, we're going to my parents' house at 1 o'clock on this day, and your parents' house we're not going to get to until 5, so just put that in the calendar.
And doing that over a text.
Well, don't do that
at
either.
night.
Or, also, don't just put it in the calendar
Oh, yeah.
and then expect your significant other to just figure it out. That's also not effective at all. I know that one from personal experience, maybe in the last 2 weeks.
So I'm going to disagree with you a little bit, because this is where you know your audience. Because if I go to Heidi and I say, hey, I'm thinking this and this, the very first thing she's going to look at me and says, did you put it in the calendar? And I'm going to go, no. So Tina's not a person who is calendar centric,
No,
right?
no.
Heidi is. So that's a good.
That's actually a really good point. That's a really good point, yeah.
And knowing your audience, yeah.
Yeah. So, but the question was, how do I do it with my one?
Right. Good point. Good
So,
That's
but
absolutely.
no, but I think Terry brings in a really good point there, right? Because he's right.
Yep.
Absolutely, there's a difference in how we can communicate. I tend to live a little bit more by what is or is not in the calendar, because that gives me my structure that I need to know what questions I need to ask. I mean, that's not how my wife works. She works very differently than I do.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, a little more fun one. Notifying family members of a birthday party. Now, I want you to think about a way, and I'll give you 2 scenarios here so that you can come up with 2 different ways that you would actually communicate it. You're having somebody over for a birthday party, and it's for your 2-year-old. How would you convey that?
Is it a question to me or Terry?
Jeff, because I would never have a
Yes, I really wanted Terry to answer that
Heidi wouldn't
question.
have a 2-year-old birthday party, but you guys would.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We would have a 2-year-old. As a matter of fact, we'd have a 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4
Month
and a 5.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. That's just how we roll. Birthday parties for especially Tina's side of the family are extraordinarily important. On that, there's lots of times, especially for 1-year-old, and this was for the 1-year-old. So I'm going to give you kind of 2 kind of things here. For the 1-year-old, we did formal invitations. We sent out formal invitations for the 1-year-old birthday party. Everyone come over. We did all these decorations, those types of things.
Did you do it in a British accent?
I did not do it in a British accent. Now, nor do I even can do a British accent, and nor am I going to try to do a British accent.
monocle.
I have no idea what that is, but so for like 1-year-old birthday party, we've done something as formal as that, because that formality is really important, especially to my wife's side of the family. For a 2-year-old birthday party, once you start getting there, it starts to kind of taper downhill. Not necessarily formal invitations go out. It's a phone call or a text message or an email. Sometimes that goes out for that. But there are certain ones that, especially the important ones, 1, 5, as they get a little bit older, those types of things where our family does them a little bit more formal.
Increments of 5 are super important.
Absolutely.
It's
That's the way it is.
You got
but it works the same as you get older too, right? I mean, once you start hitting like 50, you do 50, you do 55, you do 60, and I don't know where the break is when you go from into ones. Is it 70, then you go to 71 to 72, or does it get to 80 and then you do 81? I don't know.
I mean, once you get to 80, you want to do every year.
Every
Because you
year.
don't know from that point on.
Yeah.
I mean, things get a little more iffy. I mean, even green bananas are a rough investment at 80.
Yeah.
Right?
Maybe.
You never know.
As Josh is like crawling out of his skin, guys, stop talking! Honestly, we're just having fun, right?
Yes.
A little bit with it, but no, there's some of that stuff that we do, honestly, very formal, because it's kind of just the expectation with the families.
So, and then is it fair to say that there might be other families that if you sent them a formal invitation and didn't post it on Facebook, there would be some people up in arms about that? Not necessarily on your family, but in general.
Yeah, I think so. It wouldn't happen in our family because none of both of mine and my wife's side of the family aren't big Facebook people. We don't post that kind of stuff out there. But yeah, I think in today's culture, with the advent of social media, I think people are almost looking for the e-invite before they look for anything in the mail. As a matter of fact, we just went through a wedding not that long ago with a friend, and there was most of the invitations were all sent via a online forum. It wasn't sent via went and bought the special paper to put the other special paper on to get the fancy writing on it, to tie the little bow, to put it in an envelope, to mail it out. That cost you $7 to do the whole thing by the time you bought the stamp.
To end up in the trash.
To end up in the trash, very good, or hanging on your wall in
You just lost
Yes, I'm
3
sorry.
of our 6 viewers.
But yeah, I think there would be a portion of that audience that we will lose if you didn't do some of that stuff.
So I got a great point
Go ahead,
to bring up
please.
in
Yes.
what you guys are talking about as far as this is. This drives me back to how if we really want effective communication, we need to be in the mindset of, Stephen Covey I think talks about this, seeking first to understand. Because if you're offended that you didn't see something on Facebook, or you're offended that you didn't get a text, then you need to reevaluate. Like my kids don't do Facebook, but they both have Instagram accounts, which I don't. Right? Well, I mean, I think I do, but I don't have it anywhere. And so Heidi will always show me pictures of Hope and Sam Instagram stuff. Now, if I was offended, I should be offended that they're not, sending them in an email or a text message. How am I supposed to know what's going on, right? But I'm not. If I want to know those things, I should be willing to figure out that that's how they communicate, and put it on the onus of me. So if you're finding yourself being offended by communication, and somebody's not intentionally doing it, like,
Yes.
so there's times when people are trying to be offensive.
There's bad actors, right?
But if they're not intentionally trying to do it, then don't take offense. Figure out the best way, what is in your control, how can you communicate with them, or figure out how to communicate with them. So, and then, I appreciate all these examples, but that's ultimately, we're responsible for our own communication, right? And if we walk around going like, well, I can't believe they are, then, that's on us. So, anyway, next scenario.
No, I completely agree.
Don't make me flip a table.
Do we want another scenario?
So, I have a good one.
Okay.
And then we can wrap it up. But and this is just an example of one of the things that I think is we're talking about communication and how you can misunderstand something in a way you gotta think of the other person and what their intent is and that kind of thing. Is Heidi and I, when we were actually probably still happens once in a while, but when we were first married, this used to just absolutely cause us to fight. Right? So we would, if we were going somewhere, and you're walking up to the car and you hit the little code pad or you hit your little button and you get in, and then, or maybe even back in the day when you had to unlock your car, we'd get in and she would be walking around the other side and I would have to hit the unlock button. But before I could get to the unlock button, she would be at the window going knock, 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 like, hey, you gotta unlock this. And inside the car, when we were first married, it would be, she would open the door, I'm like, why in the world would you knock on the window? I was literally a millisecond away from hitting the unlock button. And she'd be like, well, I just wanted to get in the car. I said, yes, but I was gonna get, and pretty soon, 10 miles down the road, we're like arguing about dinner from 3 weeks ago because it just escalated to that point. And so it got to the point where when she just, it was this response, she just knocked, and if she wasn't meaning anything by it, it was just her way of communicating that, hey, I'm still out here. And I had to get to the point where I was, it was like nails in a chalkboard, but I had to understand that she wasn't intending to be, rude by it or communicating anything. Like she was just the way she acted, right? Now I'm sure from her standpoint, she's worked on like, oh, just give him a second, right? But that was an example of like where things can just kind of blow up because of misunderstandings of communication. And before there was even any words, all of a sudden you're all of a sudden at odds with your communication style. So I think again, just focusing on what can I control, how can I not take offense, how can I try to understand what the person really meant, rather than just immediately assuming like this email was really offensive, right? Because email can be taken, all kinds of communication can be taken the wrong way. So, but seeking you first to understand what that person is intending first. So, I think it's a good way to live your life.
Yeah.
So.
Fantastic point. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think to kind of summarize all of this and put a bow on it, communication is a lot more in depth than maybe it appears at the surface. There's a lot of variables that come into play, and it's two-directional. And being conscientious of all of those components can help you be way more effective when you take them into consideration.
Definitely.
So, all right, I think that kind of wraps up this topic on communication.
Yeah.
So,
Thanks for joining us. This is
Yeah.
Josh, Jeff, and Terry. Say goodbye, guys.
Bye.
bye. Okay, we're gonna do the recap thing. And
Not really, but I suppose we should.
We don't have to.
No.
This one I don't think we have to.
Okay, then I'm good with it. I'm good with it.
Yep. Sweet.
I think some of the ones we do apologetics, I think it's really nice to give them the...
It is.
Because we can talk on some of those points, and we can even get lost in some of those points. So giving them the quick boom, 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 so they can go research it, helps. This one is,
That's kind of why I did the summary at the end like that.
yeah, it's...
Kind of summarize it to like,
Yeah, I think...
just be aware that you are doing more than you think.
Here, Joshy.
High level. What?
I was reading the types that you're talking about that, and I can't get physical out of my head.
Good job.
I was really trying not to, but I couldn't.
He tells me this while he's looking at me.
We're gonna do the physical communication in our marriage talk.
Now that's a paywall.
Yes.
I'm so sorry, Josh. I'm gonna have to make you start over on
it's
that.
fine. It's okay. I need to be more succinct with it anyway, so.
No, you were doing wonderful. You were talking and I couldn't get that was out of my head. Woo! Yes, that makes that much better.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So, we're going to talk about communication today.
Jeff started giggling.
I did not start giggling. I could tell. I did not.
You guys.
I was straight. I had a smile on my face, but I was not giggling.
All right.
So Terry normally starts it off with.
Yes, we'll let Terry start.
All right. Hey guys, welcome. What are we doing? Hey guys. All right. Excellent. Well, we are going to talk about effective communication, and we have one of the experts in effective communication, Josh Hall. So, Josh, why don't you kind of lead this conversation and communicate what you want to explain to us? Should be fun.
It will be fun, yes. I will add a disclaimer. Expert is a very overstatement of what I am. I think it's good for all of us to be reminded of the things that we're going to talk about
Good
as this, though, which is why we're doing the topic. And as part of that,